All right, we'll get started here. I know people are going to be trickling in as we go, but wanted to kick things off today. And first of all, thank you all for attending today's webinar. My name is Tyler Mason. I'm the digital media manager here at Medical Alley. We're excited to have you join this conversation today, how healthcare can develop products like the consumer goods industry, presented by Delve. I'm going to introduce our guest in a minute, but first I just want to go over a couple housekeeping items. Get asked a lot about if this is recorded. This will be recorded, so you'll be able to watch it back afterwards. If you have to leave early or you want to send it to your colleagues or anyone else that might be interested, that's no problem at all. So we'll have a recording of that. That'll be sent out to everyone who registered. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A function down below at the bottom of the screen. Matthew, our host here, will be answering those at the end. We're going to save about 10 minutes or so at the end for some Q&A. We may trickle a few in as we go as well if it's applicable. So before I introduce Matthew, I wanted to also mention one other webinar we have in a couple weeks. It's called Wireless Power and Recharging for the Next Generation of Active Implantables, and that one is hosted by Resident Link. So if you're interested in that, about wireless power technology for medical devices, you can head over to medicalalley.org/events and register for that one. So now we'll kick it off with our host of this today's webinar. Sorry, I lost my notes here. So Mathieu Turpault is the VP of Design at Delve, a product innovation firm. Delve designs and develops medical devices, as well as consumer and commercial products. And Matthew's cross-industry focus gives Delve's clients in healthcare an edge. He helps them apply ideas from outside of healthcare, leading to innovations like Dexcom's G6 and G7. So without further ado, Matthew, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tyler. And thank you very much to Medical Ali for the invitation to speak today. So good morning, good afternoon to everyone, wherever you are calling from. And thank you for joining. So the topic for today is we now live in the age of medsumer. And, as the standard of care is shifting from acute care settings like hospitals and clinics to home care, the medical device industry is facing pressure to adapt to new consumer expectation. So how do we define medsumer era? So again, as the cost of healthcare keeps on rising and going up, and as consumers are becoming more proactive in the management of their care, they're taking the managing of their health in their own hands, the delivery of care really shifts from the traditional healthcare settings to home care. And one of the sharpest examples of this is to look at the wearable market, a big part of which is healthcare-related wearables. And if you look at that market, it's set to surpass, $60 billion in year 27. So only a few years from now, 5 years from now, about $60 billion. So the medsumer era is well underway. So, why are we seeing such a shift? And there's a number of trends that are really impacting that shift. So the first one, and this is data that is from the US Department of Health and Human Services, is the cost of healthcare going up, and especially here in the US. So as the cost of healthcare is increasing, it's pushing healthcare into the hands of untrained patients and lay caregivers, and in most of the case, in the home environment. The second trend, and this is data coming from the CDC, is that 60% of Americans today live with a chronic condition, a chronic disease. And if you think of it, about 1 in 3 Americans, adults, are obese, and the mental health claims have increased more than 100% over the past 10 years. And this will be further exacerbated by our aging population. By 2030, 1 in 5 people will be over the age of 65. 1 in 5. So 20% of the population. I know that well because I will be borderline of being part of that demographics. Third trend that's really impacting this push toward the medsumer era is, and this is data coming from AARP, is that across the board, across generation, there is an expectation that and the desire to have the standard of care be delivered at home, not in the traditional healthcare setting. And for example, if you look at millennials and Gen Z, they have an expectation that healthcare services will be delivered just like any other consumer services. Compared to previous generation, they're far less likely to need a primary care provider to coordinate their care. They are twice as likely to use telemedicine, and they are 3 times as likely to use a smart device for their healthcare needs. So that's, for the younger generation. But the seniors are not really too far behind. During COVID, the seniors were asked to basically stay away from hospital and acute care settings. And 44% of seniors view technology more positively today than they did before the pandemic. So regardless of generations, people are more comfortable using technology than before, and they're more likely to use technology to manage their healthcare needs. So if you take a step back and you look at these trends really impacting the push toward medsumer, the cost of care is going up, population is aging with more chronic conditions, and we expect a consumer level convenience basically out of healthcare services. So it should be no surprise that there's a big shift and a big push toward the medsumer era. But let's build on that last trend here. So one of the consequences that medical device users expect a consumer level experience. And this move has really important implication for those of us who are involved with designing safe and effective medical devices, because now we have to design for a complete new set of users, complete new types of environment, and we'll cover some of the implication of that today. But on the plus side, patients will have more control over their care. They'll be able to manage things in a more convenient way. They will be managing on their own schedule as opposed to relying on their HCP schedule. So it will be more convenient in general. But as the shift is happening, at least in the short term, what we'll see is basically greater risk, because as we're making that shift, challenges are going to rise with lay users with limited training, being able to use products safely and effectively. And that's until the med device industry catches up and is better able to design effective medsumer solutions. So I don't think there's much arguing about this shift we're discussing here today. In fact, the industry seem to agree. This is what I'm going to share with you here is data that's coming from a research that was commissioned by Jabil, the contract manufacturers, where they engaged a marketing research firm called SIS International to conduct and poll basically 210 healthcare decision makers in the US and across the world, and to really try to understand basically what the trends were. And what they found out is that 90% of healthcare decision makers think that the consumer demand will drive innovation. So the consumer will be in the driver's seat, according to healthcare decision makers. In addition, 92% of them think that healthcare companies need to act more like consumer tech companies. So across the board here, you see that there is a realization that the consumer will be in the driver's seat, and there's a need to change for the industry in terms of how we approach development. But what's really surprising and the rub in all of this is that out of all these people who were polled, only 44% of them think that manufacturing companies with healthcare experience will be able to lead that innovation. So that's a big surprise. And I guess, it begs the question as to why is that? And, how might we help to change that? So that's some of the things that I will try to cover today. But as we consider designing products differently for a medsumer application, I think it's fair to say, and that's my opinion, that designing for safe and effective devices is no longer enough. It's no longer enough. We need to do better. And the companies with consumer product experience who have an advantage in designing medical devices for their home use, they will have an advantage to designing for home use. And this is why having companies like Apple and Amazon enter the category is a little bit worrisome, and I think it's likely to be very disruptive. But today, I think the focus will be on, how can we as medical device manufacturer design for the new shift in environment and users. So, but you may wonder and you may ask, what gives me the right to talk about this? And I speak from the perspective of a practitioner. So over my 25-year career, I've worked and I've supervised hundreds of different medical devices and products across different categories. And I've seen that shift happen, and I've worked on a number of medsumer applications, some of which I will share with you later today as part of this presentation. So I'm the VP of design. I have a background in industrial design. This is how I first started in the design industry. And I work for Delve. Delve is a product innovation firm, and our focus and expertise is to work at the intersection of medical device and consumer industries. By the way, throughout this presentation, you will see a number of QR codes popping up, and depending on the topic that we're discussing at the time, there are just different links to our website for some content, blog posts, tools that we've developed over the years that would be relevant to the conversation today. So feel free to scan those. But if I think, beyond my 25-year experience developing medical device, Delve has been at it for more than 55 years at this point. So over the years, we've designed thousands of medical devices, and we've learned a lot from that experience. And so we speak from a place of knowledge, and we're able to connect the dots because we have developed application and solutions for a wide range of care settings. So that's for the OR, different areas in the hospital, clinics, point of care, doctor's offices, home or on-the-go medical devices. We've touched them all. We've also worked for many different types of medical device manufacturers. I mean, whether that's for a startup company, small, medium, large medical device manufacturers. And we've worked across all the classes of medical devices, from class 1, 2, and 3. So when you look at this all combined expertise, and we try to connect the dots and see the shift in the industry, this is from that perspective and that vantage points that I will be speaking today. But before I get into the shifts, and how we might consider adapting to some of these shifts, I'm a little bit curious and just want to poll the audience here to see, one, where are you calling from today? And two, have you had experience working with practitioners like me or design consulting firm or product development firms? Just curious to see what your experience might have been. So don't be shy. Feel free to, weigh in here and share where you're coming from, where you're calling from, and whether you have had that expertise. But I'll keep going for the sake of time. I will assume that a number of you have had experience working with design consulting firms. And I don't know who you worked with, but just a quick plug for what makes us different. We excel at medical device because our strategists, our designers, and our engineers are able to balance both creativity and rigor. They also both design medical devices and consumer products. And we are experts at the FDA process and its regulation. I mean, at this point, when we design medical device, that is table stakes. We are also ISO 13485 compliant. But the reality is, the true innovation in medical device is about balancing rigor and creativity, but also balancing product safety with user experience. And too much of one, and then the product won't be successful. So, but let's jump, and thanks for the inputs, by the way, in the chat here. But let's get into the shifts and what we are seeing from our perspective. So today, I will cover at a high level 4 shifts that I think are driving primarily the move to the medsumer era. I will make suggestions about things that we could do to adapt successfully to those shifts. And I will mention that these recommendations, there are, I don't claim that they are necessarily the necessary way forward, but what I will say is that I've seen a lot of clients adopt some methods and means and changes to try to adapt to this. And I've seen some clients be successful at it, and I've seen some clients experiment with it and run into some challenges. So this is from that point of knowledge that I will share what I've seen work and what I've seen fail when people were taking a shift or managing the shift. So we start with the first one, which is maybe pretty obvious, but it's going to require some adaptability and change. So from designing safe and effective devices where the focus is really truly on the product itself and not necessarily broader than the product and the user experience, to designing products that need to be desirable too, because you're now speaking with an educated consumer of healthcare and people who have high expectation, and what they're looking for is really an engaging user experience, something that will bring them back to your products over and over again. And that's a different approach to design. So it's not about just safe and effective, it's also about designing for desirability. So we'll cover that as the first shift. The next one is an obvious one that maybe many of us are really aware of, but still a fairly challenging shift, which is for decades now, we've been used to designing for very normalized settings, things where we could control the environment pretty well, regardless of what environment you designed for, whether that was the hospital or the doctor's office. We've functioned with ways of assuming that things would be a certain way. And as you move into the home and the use of products at home, basically you're facing a larger set of challenges, larger sets of environments, and quite a bit more complicated environments to deal with. And the knowledge and the education that is required to get up to speed on understanding the level of variability is pretty significant. So something to really spend some time on. So that's shift number 2. Then we'll talk about a related shift, which is also designing for different user groups. Again, we were used to design for very, I don't know what word to use, but normed kind of a user group. And we will need to move from designing for that user group that we know full well, or these few user groups we knew full well, to designing for the lay user and their caregivers. Again, wider variety of type of end users and consumers. So again, kind of broadening the number of end users at the end of the day. And the last shift that I will cover is about digital, which is near and dear to my heart. I think this is one where I would like to spend a little bit of time, because digital is, I think, an area for which I think the medical device industry is really lagging behind most of the other industries, and for good reasons. And I'll share with you some of what these reasons might be, and in particular, some of the things that we should all consider doing to really manage this shift, because this is a shift that takes time. So these are the 4 shifts that we'll be covering today. And what I'll do next is jump into the first shift. So historically, when you think about medical device design, it's always been focused on regulatory compliance for the most part. And if you were a designer of medical device, like I was when I first started developing medical devices, your primary concern was to optimize for usability and to reduce risk of human error. And that was the charter, that was what we were tasked to do. And the focus was very much on the functional abilities of the product to deliver as a medical device. But by contrast, the consumer product industry has been focused on experience design. And your goal, if you were a designer of consumer products, was to create unique branded experiences that would delight the user and bring them back over and over again to your products. And so the approach is quite a bit different. It's less about the product. It's less product centric, and it's looking at the product as an ecosystem where you explore all of the touch points, from the way you first engage with the user knowing about your brand and your products, to the way you dispose of your product and out of the box experience, and all these design touch points that are playing a key part in the user experience. So it's really looking at design in a much broader way. But consumer are really starting to bring their expectation of unique experiences that they experience with consumer products. They're bringing that to their expectation of what a medical device should be able to deliver. And I will say that anecdotally, it's not just the consumers and the end users. We've seen it. We see it when we do usability studies for acute care setting and complex information systems, where we see the HCPs, trying to swipe right to left on the screen, because this is their expectation of how they will get to the next level of screen and interaction with their product. So they're used to very sophisticated interaction with consumer products like smart devices, and they bring that to bear in their expectation of medical devices. So the HCPs, the consumers, the end users generally basically have higher expectation. And so for designers, we're being challenged to meet an entirely new set of standards when it comes to designing for this new era. So in summary, just like, in addition of being able to design safe and effective products, because that will remain, the medical device must also deliver on a higher level of intuitiveness and sophistication. And they need to be designed so that they can be desirable too. So if we look at things that we can consider doing to try to mitigate for this and this shift, the first one that I will mention is more of a suggestion, a recommendation. I call it kind of a change of mental model, but it's more about a changing of terminology and vernacular. If you think about the fact that you're not really necessarily designing for the patient anymore, because the patient is associated with the notion of a kind of a passive consumer of healthcare. But if you were to consider really changing the terminology and consider them to be active consumer of healthcare, just that change in naming and terminology would go a long way of driving change, because it would force to challenge your own mental model about the assumptions that you've made over the years to design for that patient. They're no longer patients, they are consumer of healthcare. And I will say that I've seen this done very effectively, especially from startups, where basically that was driving their way forward, their value proposition, the way they were operating, and that was a big driver behind them being able to design effective user experiences for their products. So the first one is consider a change of mental model, to consider changing your terminology, because it will force you into managing change. The other one, which is kind of preaching against my church, so to speak, is the recommendation that you consider building internal design capabilities. And it's my experience that the medtech companies are very focused on the R&D side of innovation. So R&D engineers are very good at developing products that deliver on the functional requirements. But if you want to design a memorable product experience, you will need product designers, and you will need user experience designers, industrial designers, and interaction designers. And I'm curious to hear if in the audience, many of you have these kind of capabilities and skill sets internally. Obviously, you can always call on the outside consultants and companies like Delft to help you with development like this. But in the long run, if you want to make an impact with the medsumer era and medsumer products, you really need to integrate these design capabilities. So in particular, user experience, UX, and consumer experience, CX, which a lot of designers can offer these days. So the medtech industry is behind. I've seen a few leading companies that realize the impact of this and have started to build like significant design capabilities. But longer term, again, this needs to become a core competency. So consider bringing that skill set on the inside. And the third one that I would recommend, which is more of a low-hanging fruit, is test your products for desirability. And I call it a low-hanging fruit because most of you are already doing the necessary steps to test for usability. You have sessions with end users and consumers set up already so that you can comply with regulation. And all it would take is really just to extend the sessions that you set up with your consumers and users to really expend, say, another 15 minutes so that you can ask questions about desirability. What would make this product more desirable? How would this experience be better? Because it will give you another a set of inputs from an end user perspective that will help you design more effective user experiences. So consider just testing your products for desirability. So these are some suggestions about how to manage that shift. And I will share with you here an example of, when you do this right, things just click. And this is work that we did for Dexcom, and this was their first really true commercial platform, which was called the G6 platform. They are now launching their G7 platform, which was also this help them design. But this is really where they first step into kind of true commercial application. They came to us to redesign their G5 platform. You see on the bottom right picture right there. And what we did is we employed the principle of simplicity, and just want to be clear that we didn't coin that term, but this is the idea of building a lot of the complexity into the device itself so that you minimize the number of steps for the users. So we went from the G5 platform, which I think was like 14 steps from an end user perspective, to the G6 platform you see on the right-hand side, which was only 6 steps. And we did that by building a lot of that complexity, a lot of, I don't want to call it automation, but the number of the steps were integrated into the device so that it can be delivered very reliably. And you were not relying on the end user with limited training to be able to do this reliably. So the end result, it was a very intuitive solutions. People could figure out basically how to use the applicator out of the box with limited reliance on the iFuse, if any. So you could really truly intuitive product. And you can imagine, you see here the shift from the G5 to the G6 platform, a lot went into really considering designing a consumer grade product. And the other benefit of this approach is that basically people didn't feel like they were interacting with a medical device at all. It felt like consumer grade. And in addition of that, it was pretty painless. All people would feel was basically the equivalent of a puff of air onto their skin, when in fact the sensor was being shot under their skin at very high velocity. So people fell in love with their Dexcom continuous glucose monitor, which is what this new product category is. And Dexcom, who was a well-funded startup, when we engaged with them, became a major player in the industry of CGM. They're now competing with some of the biggest brands in the marketplace. So an example here to show that some companies like Dexcom really, how to do this well and really pay a lot of attention on designing the product to become like a leading mid-consumer product. The second shift, which again I mentioned is a bit of an obvious one, is the change in the environment. And this one is obvious, but what I will say is that it's very common for us to realize that a lot of our clients basically have built a ton of muscle memory when it comes to which environments that they're designing for. And so we're used to really normed environments, very well-controlled environments where you can rely on HCP with high level of education, and you can rely on their expertise to basically do just what's needed from a product perspective, because you can rely on them to really deliver the care reliably. The fact is, when you move into the home, you'd be surprised to see how much variability there is. And a lot of things that are not typically considered when we design medical device for the hospital setting now become new realities. And the challenge here is that learning about these new environments, building an understanding of these new home environments is something that takes time, and it takes dedication and a lot of effort. We've done it over the course of many project engagement, and it's a constantly evolving piece of knowledge that you need to bring on the inside. So this shift in environment, what can we do about it? So the first one is, this is again obvious, I kind of touched on it, but this is really be ready to challenge decade-old assumptions. And I say this because when we engage with clients trying to launch MedSumer application, it's very often that we run into a draft of a product spec where we will see that it's clear that the environment of use is left over from what we used to do. And so we have to constantly challenge assumptions and really make our clients aware of the high level of variability that you will find in a home setting. So keep in mind that your muscle memory, your templates, your product specs, your product requirement documents are all set up basically for maximum efficiency, and they're all set up to really leverage past expertise. So challenge your assumptions. Second one is to, and again, preaching against my own church in some ways, to really consider heavily investing in research, and ideally, investing in building that capability on the inside. And in here, it's really twofold. You need to build a very solid understanding of the home environment, and this is typically done through contextual research and observation. And you need to really make a point of really including that type of research on as many projects as you can, because that knowledge of the home environment will only be built over time. You can't really bypass this and have like a written description of all the things you need to plan for, because it's going to be very specific to your user types and your consumers. And it is really something that you need to develop for yourself over time. And it's going to be a constantly evolving reality. As home and technology really changes the environment at home, you need to stay on top of this and constantly refresh your understanding. So you need to really make that kind of an ongoing effort. And the other one, which is maybe another one, a low-hanging fruit from my perspective, is that while you may be used to doing a lot of usability testing in simulated environments and in usability labs, because that's, it's more efficient, it's more cost effective, and it's sometimes close enough, the reality is that you would learn immensely if you were to test your solution, your prototypes, your concepts in the context of home use. I've seen many times people come to the usability lab and say, yes, I would be using this in my bathroom. When in fact, when we did the research in contextual settings, we would discover that they would be using the device while they were making dinner, in the kitchen. They were using the device when they were watching TV while having dinner with the rest of the family. And so the context of use gets changed quite dramatically. And that too is, I think, is a low-hanging fruit. It's just, if you can afford to include that on some of your products, consider doing that research in the context of home use. So that these are some of the suggestions for dealing with shift number 2. And I'll show you an example here of, when you rethink the product requirements for home use, you're more likely to impact the design for maximum adoption. This example is a product that Dell worked with for Exogen. Exogen, their core technology is ultrasound technology, ultrasound waves that help with bone healing and tissue regeneration. So if you have a fracture or you broke a bone, you can recover much faster if you apply this therapy. And it's over the course of a number of weeks, a couple of months, and it's 20 minutes twice a day. You need to apply this ultrasound wave to the area of the injury. And what they suffered from is compliance. So they had a somewhat clinical device that they were intending to put into home use, and they were failing with compliance issue. People would miss a number of their sessions, and because they had no sense of whether it was critical to their care or not, they would stop using the device. So lack of compliance with the using of the device. So we went into the field, did contextual research, understood the context of use to try to realize basically what was missing to help with the compliance elements, and then really redesigned the device to be super simple, super easy to interact with, but then provided some user feedback in terms of the scheduling and the compliance, visualizing the fact that if you missed a session, you may be able to recover it if you compensate it in some other way. So that visual aid really made a big difference with compliance. And this product was introduced, I think, if my memory doesn't fail me, around 2017. So it's been on the market for 5-6 years, and that's still a number 1 prescribed solution for bone healing. So it's a leading product for this kind of a therapy. So it tells you that when you do your homework well with MedSumo application, it can have an enduring effect. This product is 6-7 years old, and still really a leading product for this category. Then moving on to the third shift, which is somewhat related to the fact we're designing for different environments. Now we're not designing for healthcare professionals anymore, but instead we're designing for whoever the caregiver might be. And it could be the patient family, it could be friends, it could be the patients themselves. And when you think about this user group on the left-hand side, I mean, you were used to relying on basically their level of education, the fact that they have a fairly high level of cognitive ability. So when they learn how to use about a particular device, they will maybe consult the IFUs once, and they will know how to use it. And from patient to patient, they apply that knowledge. But it's not necessarily the case when you're dealing with lay users. You have a very wide varieties of ability. I mean, cognitive and physical abilities, and even educational level. So when you think about the factors that impact competence in operating a medical device, I mean, there's literacy and language barriers. So instructions for use might become misunderstood. Dexterity, buttons on a console may be too small or too hard to press for some users, people that suffer from arthritis, for example. Vision, and this is one of my big pet peeves, because the writing on the labels and IFUs is sometimes just not usable. I have very little amount of correction, and I find myself like taking pictures of the IFUs and then zooming in so that I can make sense of the IFUs. This is nonsense. It shouldn't be that way. And then on top of that, hearing abilities, you're dealing with environments where ambient noise might be much, much higher than a typical environment, and your alarms and kind of audible cues get lost in the shuffle. And then on top of that, learning abilities and memory. So while the HCP is able to remember basically how a device is being used, some users need to go back to the IFUs every time they need to use the product because they forget. And that's the reality that you face when you design MedSumo applications. So what can we do about that shift in user, shifting from the HCP to the lay user? Well, the first one is an obvious one, but it is that principle of simplicity. Simplify, simplify, simplify. The consumers that you're designing for have much less abilities than your HCP user base. And you need to make the device like super self-explanatory to the point where you probably could use the device without relying on the IFUs. That should be the goal. So reduce the user steps whenever possible and balance your device complexity with usability. Make the device more complex to be more usable. And that's the reality of it, is that lowering the cost of healthcare is basically we're trying to shift the labor cost away from the HCP and put that onto the lay user. But the consequence is that we need to build more sophistication in the devices. So the devices will be more complex in nature. They will be, more challenging to develop, and they will be more costly to produce. So that's the reality of the move toward the medsumer era. The other thing I would recommend is design with the edge case in mind. And I'm not arguing here that you should design for the lowest denominator, because that would not be practical. But consider the principle of universal design. Look at the wide variety of abilities that your end user might have and decide what is practical to design for. I'm not saying design for the worst case scenario. Because then if you design a product for people that are generally less abled, you will design a product that will be generally more usable for the whole population. That's the principle of universal design. And the famous story around universal design you probably heard and overheard is the story around the OXO Good Grip kitchen utensils, where the founder decided to design a potato peeler that would be easier for his wife to use because she was suffering from severe arthritis. What he did, he designed a product that was more usable for everybody. And that's the reason why that brand was so successful and why everybody adopted this product. It was designed with universal design principle in mind, and this is why it was a better product. So think about the edge cases and define basically your target design. And the other one, which is obvious, is really understand your consumer deeply. And that's through empathy-based methods such as contextual inquiry and observation. And when you can, co-creation, designing with your patients, with your consumers. And one of the benefit of this is really just bringing your development team, your R&D engineers out in the field so that they can build empathy for the lay users, because the level of education and cognitive ability is going to be much lower than you think. And this reminds me of the first time I went out in the field to do contextual inquiry. It was to design video magnifiers for people with low vision, really impairment, really low vision. They needed a video magnifier to be able to read the label on their prescription bottles and their medication. And I remember this day, and I will remember it to the rest of my life. A lady was trying to write a check for a utility bill, and she was on a flat plane writing the check and then looking at the screen with a magnified image of the check. And the screen was peppered with marker marks and pencil marks everywhere because she was tempted to just go and write directly on the screen. It seems, and I mean, that's the reality of what you face in the field. And when I came back from that study, I designed differently for the rest of my career. So I would invite you to do this. It just builds so much empathy right off the bat, and it will make you a better designer, and you will design much better products. So recommendation for shift number 3. And I'll show you some example of when you do this right, and this is an example of a client that came to us. They had basically devices, safety syringes that were used and were developed for the use in the hospital setting. And there was an increase in chronic diseases that needed basically, regular injection at home using biologic drugs, bigger molecules, more viscosity in the drug, harder pressure to inject the drug. And the question was, are our products able to deliver the standard of care that we expect at home? Will people be able to use it? So example of qualitative research, 9 patients and consumers across the US, and living with them for 4 to 6 hours to understand the context of use and see how they were managing through the injection cycle. And discovered a lot of things. Picture on the bottom right really changed my approach to medical device design. I now always make sure that people with really long nails will be able to actuate the device, because that's the reality of what's happening in the field. And when you can, and this was a good example of doing this right, is bring your patients, your consumers into the process, design with them, help them design for themselves. And again, this builds a huge level of empathy that makes us all better designers and better engineers at designing medsumer applications. So the last shift, and I mentioned that this one was dear to my heart, and it's not just impacting us as medical device designers and manufacturers. I mean, digital transformation is everywhere. It's impacting everything that we do, and technology convergence is really changing the reality of which products we interact with. And many traditional physical products are disappearing. They're being replaced by digital solutions. This will remind me of, I did a TED Talk in 2014 about predicting the disappearance of physical objects in favor of digital experiences. And this is happening here on this example alone. I can remember years where I would be designing 2 or 3 lens sets because that was a big product category. It was a big revenue maker for a lot of our clients. And so lens sets were a common medical device that had to be designed. But the reality that because of the advent of technology, things becoming a lot easier to use, now it's being replaced by more digital solutions and connected devices. So this product category of the Lancet is likely to die soon if it hasn't died already. So it's just the reality of the push of technology evolving the reality of medical devices. So everything will have, it is my opinion that everything will have a digital component to it. And even if you think about simple category as a panjector, which is like very hardware centric in and of itself, I wouldn't be surprised if, and starting to see it happen, if 2-3 years from now, it was a consumer expectation that they would be able to rely on video IFUs as opposed to printed IFUs. We're already seeing that being asked of us when we do the design work, and I wouldn't be surprised if that became kind of the standard moving forward. So you will have some kind of digital elements to your physical products. And if you think about even other product category in the OR, everything is starting to be connected, technology enabled. The ecosystem that any product fits into is digitally driven in one way or another. Any product that is connected, IV pumps and the likes connected to the EMR, means that there is a software companion app somewhere dealing with the data. Your ecosystem is becoming more complex, and the digital experience is going to be a big part of it. And that is true for consumers as well. But the problem, there's good reasons why the medical device industry is lagging behind. And that reason is really the fact that I think the FDA came at regulating digital products late. They were a little bit reactive. And that created, because of that, and lack of being proactive, created a lot of, I don't know how to explain it, but the fact that it was natural for medical device manufacturers to not consider onboarding another level of risk. What are we expecting to face in terms of scrutiny if we start implementing some kind of digital solution? Will we fail certification? Will we not be able to launch our products? And I've seen this on a number of projects where we knew that a digital solution would be beneficial. We knew consumer expected that level of engagement on the digital side, but we were concerned that basically it would potentially slow down the product introduction and it would have an impact on revenue generation for this product category. So the decision was to ignore the digital solution because it was too risky from a business perspective. So when you do that project after project after project, it's no surprise that the industry as a whole is lagging behind because we've not built that muscle memory. We've not built the background, the backbone to be able to manage digital experience design, and we can't build that effectively as part of our consumer products. So there are good reasons why the industry is lagging behind. There's another challenge associated with digital, which I've seen also from experience working with clients, is that too often there's a misunderstanding about what it takes to design a very effective digital engagement and interactions. And the perception is that if you have a software engineering team, then you have what it needs to design a digital solution. But if you want to design a consumer-grade digital experience, you will need UX designers and interaction designers. And you will need to integrate them into your software team. And the companies who have invested in this really are able to make a difference. So medical device industry is behind on this. And whether we like it or not, digital will come to be a part of the user experience, especially if you're designing for a consumer application, consumer application. There is an expectation that there will be some kind of digital element to your user experience. So you need to be able to build that in. So what can we do about this? Couple of things. Here I say consider changing your risk consideration for digital, and I'm not advocating for taking undue risk here, but because building in your ability to address digital experience design is going to take a long time. It's a cultural change. It's a new set of skill sets. It requires to start early to really be able to make a difference, in a couple of years from now. And what I'm suggesting here is if you can, bring to the table some simple digital solutions. So I mentioned the QR code leading to video IFUs. That would be supplemental to a printed IFU. If you can do that, you build basically the backbone, the logistics to be able to have digital solutions. You learn how to build a team to be able to service this, to develop this, and support this in the long run. And consider building some companion apps also for educational purposes, because then you have the backbone. When you decide to really go full in with digital, you know what structure to leverage. But this takes time. So we consider, changing your risk considerations. The other one is, again, consider acquiring that skill set, because digital experience design is a skill set of its own, and it requires dedicated skill set, people who have been trained doing this work. And try to bring that capability in-house as part of your R&D team and integrate it as part of your development team as well. I've seen many examples of digital design teams not integrated into the development team, and then that failing because there was a lack of connection. There was a lack of collaboration between the two. The way it works best is when design teams and development teams are embedded together and connected at the hip. That's what works best. So I know we're running tight on time, so I'll try to speed up toward the back end of the presentation. I will mention that if you're interested in ways and means, processes, and tools for designing more effective design experience around medical devices, especially devices that have both physical and digital elements, I will invite you to scan this QR code or go to our website. There's a number of tools, including the digital physical workflow, which is very simple and very basic, but is a way to force the integration of digital and physical experiences together from the get-go. So please visit. There's a lot of kind of open resource that are available for sharing there. Just taking a step back and just summarizing, some of the shift that we see that are going to require a shift of attitude and approach in terms of design. So we need to design more than just for safety and efficacy. We need to be able to design for desirability. We also need to design for the home environment, and we need to build our knowledge and understanding of the high level of variability of the home environment. And we need to be careful not to rely too much on our muscle memory of designing for highly controlled environments. And you need to design for a much wider group of lay users and caregivers with much lower ability than your typical end users and caregivers were in the past. And then finally, just try to build muscle memory around digital. Plant the seeds of digital today so that in a year or two, you'll be better able to have a more cohesive user experience that span across hardware, software, and digital experience. And I will leave you with a couple of thoughts. So, over the long term, I view the consumerization of healthcare as a net positive. Patients will have much greater control over their own healthcare, and it will be at a lower cost. That said, for manufacturers and designers, relearning how we design safe and effective medical devices in this new era will not be easy. Companies who have rarely prioritized intuitive design beyond what was absolutely required will have the toughest transition. And companies who are willing to adopt lessons from the consumer product industry will have an advantage as they move into the Matsumer era. And leave you with some examples here that make me very proud, to be honest. When you design, for the full holistic consumer experience, and if you do this well, consumers will fall in love with your products. They will become brand ambassadors for your products. They will ask for your doctor to be prescribing your product rather than your competitors, and this will drive your bottom line, like it did for Dexcom. Dexcom was a well-funded startup. They designed the consumer-grade product across the physical and digital experience. They created a new product category, and they're one of the leader of the CGM market with some of the biggest brands globally. So it's a good example of how to do this well. And so I just wanted to close on that. when you do Midsummer right, there's a lot of really positive application for businesses. And I will leave you with my contact information. You have my email here. Feel free to reach out to me directly over email. And the QR code will link you to my LinkedIn page, where I would be delighted and happy to connect with you to continue this conversation offline. So, Tyler, I will turn it back to you. Thank you for joining. Thank you for attending today. I hope there are some takeaways from the presentation. And I will leave it up to you to decide if we have time for Q&A.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got just under 10 minutes left. And thank you, Mathieu, for that great information, some great insights, great case studies. I think it was also great to see all the people chiming in from where they're tuning in from. We had a lot from here in Medical Alley, but of course throughout the United States. And I think even a few international people were out there watching today. So that's great to see. So if anyone out there does have any questions, we've got a few minutes, and Mathieu can answer those. So we've had a couple come into the Q&A chat so far. So again, put those in there if anyone has one. The first one that came in, though, Mathieu, is of the shifts that you talked about, which as a manufacturer would you focus on first?
Good question. I think they're probably ought to be organized in kind of a ranking order of priorities. I will say building your ability to conduct contextual inquiry and get connected to your end users out in the field is probably number one, because it will, even if it's hiring outside consultants to help you get there, just bring your R&D team out in the field to understand the context of use, the lay user, will be probably your most valuable investment in all this. So that would be my recommendation, is building that muscle memory on the front end, being able to conduct research effectively. Even very qualitatively, guerrilla style, will make a big difference in your ability to design unique product experiences.
And again, feel free for everyone in the audience to send your questions. We've got about 5 or 6 minutes left here before we have to wrap up. One other question that came in talking about acute care. Do these shifts apply to acute care? And if so, how do they apply?
Some do. So it's true that most of what we covered today was really specific to Midsummer. But if you think about the shift affecting kind of the digital experience design, even acute care, there's a few companies that are exceptions that are really on the front end of really developing unique digital experiences. But again, we're seeing the medical device industry being a little bit behind from other industries. So I think the digital shift is still a bit of a struggle, even for acute care setting. I mentioned this expectation of being able to swipe on your screen. There's still a lot of resistance, or I don't know what the right word is, to adopting some of these more sophisticated ways of interacting with medical devices. So there's still a little bit behind. So I think the digital shift is still impacting acute care setting product design.
We'll give it another minute or two here if anyone has any questions here before we wrap up. In the meantime, I'll remind everyone of a few other upcoming Medical Alley events. I see someone here raise their hand. If you, we did have another, actually here, one more came in here. I'll jump to the question here. What is the typical timeline you have seen to implement digital solutions to these types of products?
Well, that's a tough one, because that really depends on what the digital solution is. I will say, if you're doing, I mentioned kind of the low-hanging fruit of just implementing some simple video IFUs connected to QR code. That's pretty straightforward. Still requires some putting in place the necessary backbone to be able to manage this information. But you can probably within a year get up to speed and have this be a solution available. And you can maybe leverage some outside services to help you take that first step. So maybe a year to less than a year. But if you're trying to develop from scratch new type of companion apps and application, even with outside partner help, it's going to be more than a year. And so I think that's why I think this is a particular challenge, is that it requires so much adjustments from a cultural standpoint, from everything that from an engineering standpoint needs to be developed, that this is year-long transition. So, companion app, to do it well, probably going to take you a couple of years.
Awesome. Well, thanks for answering that. And again, a minute or two here. If anyone has any last minute questions, I'll remind people, if you missed it at the beginning, of a few upcoming Medical Alley events. We have another webinar on October 17th, so 2 weeks from today, actually, called Wireless Power and Recharging for the Next Generation of Active Implantables, and that one will be presented by Resonant Link. So everyone attending today will also get a link to register for that if you're interested a few weeks from now. And then we have another in-person event for startup entrepreneurs and investors. So if there's any of you out in this group, we have our Tap the Cash event in St. Paul at Urban Growler on October 30th. So a great networking opportunity for entrepreneurs and investors to meet and just kind of chat there as well. But I'm not seeing any questions. Matthew, if you have any last words, I'll let you chime in. But
yeah, and I'll just invite, just to remind people that one of our offices is based in Madison, Wisconsin. And so if you find yourself in the area and decide you want to visit, send me a note. Be happy to host and just continue the conversation offline.
I'm a former Badger myself, so spent plenty of time in Madison. Well, great. If there's no more questions, we'll let everyone move on with their day. And we really appreciate you attending today. Thank you to Matthew and to Delve for this presentation. We hope everyone enjoyed it. And again, enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you so much. Take care.